The Trump 25% automotive tariffs are alive. What is this going to mean for cars not made in America? You might initially think, oh, well, Teslas are made in America, right? Fremont, Austin. Oops. It looks like the tariffs are going to come. This is based on a White House official. It looks like the tariffs are going to be based on the amount of foreign parts that the vehicle contains. So every vehicle, every model is going to have to go through essentially an analysis on, all right, how much of this car, whether it's the CATL batteries, the lithium ion phosphate batteries that are used in Teslas or tires or otherwise, are from other countries, that will be the weight on the 25% tariff. So just to make an example, and just to make math easy, let's just go with a $100,000 vehicle that is 25% manufactured in a foreign environment. Then you would take $25,000 of the portion of the vehicle's value that's subject to the tax, and you would multiply that by the 25% tax, and it would essentially have an increased cost of $6,250 in that example. So these tariffs are going to increase the prices of these vehicles. And of course, the motivation is for Donald Trump to bring back American manufacturing. He actually refers to Section 232 and sort of the Commerce Department investigation that has gone into essentially finding out, and this goes back to the 90s, finding out, hey, how much of our reliance on foreign manufacturers are we potentially risking with our national security? In other words, are we creating a national security threat because we rely so much on foreign manufacturing? Sorry, it wasn't a 90s investigation. It was a 2019 investigation of auto imports under the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. He's referring to this. Now, this might sound confusing because we think of Section 230 and then we're like, oh, kind of like the Communication Decency Act that, everybody has been going on and off about regarding the liability that communications companies or platforms have, like YouTube or Twitter, for the content that's posted on those platforms. But this is different. This is, to be clear, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. It refers to a Commerce Department investigation where they found that excessive foreign imports weakened the domestic industrial base. So Donald Trump is using this as a basis for national security-related tariffs. One of the reasons this matters is because if Donald Trump uses national security as a reason for an emergency authority, he might actually be able to withstand court challenges, whereas if he simply says, hey, there's no national security concern, instead we're simply tariffing to collect revenue, then what he potentially could be subject to is losing a court battle where people say that's the power of Congress. So what he's actually doing here is he's saying, oh, wow, okay, there's also a 1-month tariff exemption for auto parts imports until May 3rd. Okay, that's interesting. This, by the way, is just now coming out, so we're just getting these sort of headlines in here. So the auto proclamation provides a 25% tariff on the value of the vehicle that is manufactured in another country. Example, CATL batteries for Teslas, right? Just as an example. You could do 4680s in America, like what's being used in the Cybertruck. But anyway, the White House has also made it clear there are logistical challenges in figuring out sort of what is USMCA compliant and not. And the White House is also arguing that we should rely on Congress to give a tax break to Americans who buy American cars. So in other words, he's basically now saying, hey, like if you want a new American car that, let's say, costs $100,000, the tariffs are going to, that's 25% manufactured somewhere else, that car is now going to cost $106,000. I'm only using 100 to make the math simple, okay? And Congress should give you a tax credit towards, maybe some of the difference that you're paying. Problem with that is what you're really doing is you're putting more pressure on that budget reconciliation bill, and the further you get away from sort of just renewing existing policies, the less likely it is you'll be able to use budget reconciliation to actually get some of these tariff exemptions, these tax breaks through. And relying on Congress is very, very slow. But it looks like the automotive tariffs are going to go into effect on April 3rd, so next week. Well, they'll go into effect on the 2nd, but they'll practically start collecting the taxes on April 3rd at midnight. Industry experts on both sides are urged to come together immediately. The reason they say by the way that there are these talks about two sides. It's because unions sort of encourage tariffs, whereas a lot of manufacturers in America don't encourage tariffs. This makes sense because obviously manufacturing in the United States could increase union membership for, well, powerful unions like the United Auto Workers Union. The White House officials are also saying that there's no way for other countries to get exempt from the auto tariffs. Notably, about 5 minutes after saying that, they're saying that auto parts, so maybe a stock like AutoZone, would be exempt for another month. And the White House says that they want to move away from being an assembly line for foreign parts. They're looking to restore United States manufacturing capabilities. The Trump proclamations argue that revisions to the USMCA and KORUS trade agreements have, quote, not yielded sufficient positive outcomes in automotive trade. So in other words, we've had trade agreements before, but they've sort of failed to make a difference. And as a result, Donald Trump is now getting more aggressive here. In questioning earlier, Donald Trump was asked if he was aware of the 2% fall in the stock market today, and he was not, is what he said, and that he suggested the market will resolve itself, so he wasn't terribly worried about the stock market. The White House says we should expect Congress to pass a measure giving tax breaks to Americans who buy American cars. Tax revenue will be used to give tax cuts to Americans. There's some risks associated with assuming that's going to happen. And cars coming into the U.S. under USMC will be tariffed according to their foreign part content. This is really interesting because the USMCA basically set up these supply chains between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and now all of a sudden those supply chains that have been established are basically getting taxed to the tune of another 25%. Canada's Carney says he is sure he will speak with Donald Trump soon, and Ottawa will react soon to the U.S. tariff announcement with likely retaliatory tariffs. And the 25% tariff does apply to autos and auto parts in addition to any other duties or fees. However, again, the auto parts are being delayed in terms of their implementation for another month until the beginning of May. Donald Trump and the Trump administration did tease that this auto tariff announcement would be coming, and it appears it has arrived. USMCA-compliant automobile parts will remain tariff-free until the Secretary of Commerce establishes a process to apply tariffs to their non-U.S. content for parts, and we expect that'll be May 3rd. We see here that, with some other news here, Trump auto tariffs are being imposed under Section 232. Again, the reason they tell you this basis is really just to establish a legal precedent here. Donald Trump says the European Union is suing a lot of our companies, and this is sort of basically a way to respond. Doubles down on, hey, we need to get, what's it called? We need to get our hands on Greenland for national security purposes. Auto tariffs should be net neutral, quote, maybe good for Tesla, says Donald Trump. This remains to be seen. The idea here is that Donald Trump might sort of support Tesla from a competitive point of view, but that foreign content is still going to be subject to a tariff here. So this did briefly lead to some enthusiasm, briefly, in Tesla stock in after hours. So you had a little bit of a brief pop in Tesla stock there, up to about 2%. That's actually plummeted back down to only about a 70 basis point gain, though the stock is positive after being down 5.58% on the day. It's positive by about 72 basis points. That's likely because of this push in from Donald Trump. But again, he's not doing the math on the content and sort of just suggesting, hey, if competition is reduced, Tesla might benefit because they do have facilities in the United States. And in fairness, that is a benefit to Tesla. Now, Trump does say we will have a form of a deal on TikTok, and if it's not finished yet, we'll go ahead and extend the TikTok shutdown. It sounds like he's willing to give China a little reduction in tariffs if they work out a TikTok deal, which is really interesting. So now ramp up the tariffs so you can kind of negotiate them back down in exchange for TikTok. Yeah, well, here, 25% tariffs. Give us TikTok for free, and we'll get rid of the tariffs. It's an interesting strategy. UAW has now responded that they are applauding the Trump administration for stepping up tariffs. Not a surprise, because again, they benefit from this. Trump, again, just to reiterate, provides a 1-month extension for those USMCA compliant parts. There's a lot of talk that this is going to be a massive boon to the used autos market, that used vehicles wouldn't be subject to this sort of tax because they're not new imports, so to speak. So there could be an explosion in sort of the value of used vehicles, which frankly is great for anybody with a used vehicle. You know, like a relatively new Cybertruck could potentially, in a weird way, sell for more than a new Cybertruck, depending on how much is foreign content. Now, interestingly about the Cybertruck as an example, I think a lot of that is US content. I don't know in terms of the chips, how many of those chips are from foreign locations, or the tires, but it seems the steel and batteries are US made, and so the Cybertruck might actually be one that's subject to sort of the least amount of some of these taxes, maybe even Rivian's to some extent. So this will be really interesting, but the used auto market will be one that gets a big benefit from this. We're expecting to see steel and aluminum imports already. We've seen that, talked and threatened this 25%, as well as Chinese imports, the 10 plus 10. We think that in the short term, these sort of tariff announcements could reduce the availability of inventory, lead to really quick sticker shock for vehicles, a potential up to 30% production disruption within 1 week, according to Cox Automotive. And then even more if we end up getting tariffs on the EU, Japan, South Korea, and other trading partners. You should also expect to see incentives pretty rapidly decline for vehicle purchases or the ability of auto manufacturers to actually negotiate. So this is a pretty big announcement coming straight from the White House. It's going to be a lot to sort of digest, like, all right, what are the implications of all of this going to be? Surely in the short term, autos will end up indicating some form of pricing pressure because of this. We did also just over the last 10 minutes or so here just get some fresh updates coming out of the White House, especially with regard to clarity on how those tariffs are going to function in terms of the quantity of their products that are manufactured elsewhere, but also for automotive parts. So we got some color on that. We'll also want to take a quick peek at some sticks to see how they're moving, but first, I want to make sure I got everything covered here. President said, we saw that. Okay, the administration projects that the tariffs would result in $100 billion of additional revenue. A lot of analysts are looking at this and saying that this is relatively unlikely that the tariff revenue would be that high, and that number likely is based on no adjustment for demand or adjustments to infrastructure or supply chains. Supply chain adjustments are very slow and difficult to make. Trump cast the tariffs as permanent and says he was not interested in negotiating any exceptions. GM, Ford, Stellantis dropped in after hours, of course. Tesla's still slightly positive, though, because of that Trump comment. Trump's also now threatening levies or taxes on lumber, semiconductors, pharmaceutical drugs. These are still to come. And these are all separate from Liberation Day of April 2nd, tariffs, reciprocal tariffs on individual country-to-country based tariffs to sort of match some of the value-added taxes that some of the countries, assess. So then we have, let's see here, Trump, though, has argued that tariffs will help stir the... Okay, the problem with this idea about encouraging domestic production is really, really heavy. And I'm going to tell you about domestic production, but super quick pitch on HouseHack. Remember, the non-accredited investment round is live for HouseHack. So if you want to see all the properties we have, go to househack.com. You can see some before and afters, what we do. It's all here, the valuation of the company. If you go to invest, you'll see you get a 5% yield. You get all the upside, just like a stock. You get all the upside of the company, you get some downside protection as well, you get to diversify to real estate. And over the last week, a lot of people have been joining, mostly, in my opinion, because people are trying to diversify a little bit from real estate. We're getting a lot of original investors, too, that are saying we want to add more. Even some people who have invested recently, and they're like, oh, I already want to add more. So I think people are looking for opportunities to diversify away from what's going on in the stock market right now, which isn't a surprise because some sticks are getting hit right now. Now, you could see that mention bump here from, wrong one, that's this one. Okay, you can see this mention bump right here Tesla, Donald Trump mentioned right here where Trump suggests that Tesla would benefit. I highly doubt that because of the amount of battery content that is produced on foreign levels, but who knows? Maybe that'll be true. I wouldn't be surprised to see Elon Musk initially positive, because he usually is, in response to acts of either Pam Bondi. Today he's like, hey, Pam Bondi's work is already working. Vandalism against Teslas is already down. I think it's a little early to say. I hope that's true. But anyway, I think this idea that we could simply rebuild supply chains magically and rapidly, especially companies like Ford, who's down 4.5% in after hours, is a little far-fetched, mostly because if they did, GM's down about 7% in after hours, 3% on the day. Because if they did, then, what happens when the next president brings free trade back? Then you've got lots of problems, because you kind of oopsie-doopsied. And now you overbuilt in an area where it's now more expensive to manufacture. So, the uncertainty of these tariffs is certainly going to ramp up, and it looks like it's going to hit markets pretty decently tomorrow. Q's already down 40 basis points, down a couple percent today, ended at about 484. This was a pit stop on the way up, so we're not surprised to be back at 484. But yeah, a lot of confusion about how to actually plan to make investment decisions here, because now what happens is when you make these proclamations, you have to now go through part by part all these vehicles and decide, okay, is this going to get taxed? Now, how much of this part is going to get taxed? What about this? Is it technically made in America? What is a made in America part? Is it one that's 51% American, or one that's 100% American? Or are we applying a portion of this tariff to the portion of each part that is foreign? Tracing these things is very difficult. It's the same thing with oil. Some of these oil tariffs and talk of these that we're seeing, you'd have to trace back all the way back to the origin well to find out how you're going to actually levy assessments or taxes on tariffs, and all of that creates substantial uncertainty. This is why it's no surprise that the Atlanta Fed is now suggesting that there's a likely only 0.2% increase in GDP in the first quarter, gold adjusted, which is really bad because usually those numbers get revised down. And we got some nasty hard data as well this morning with some of those new orders that's starting to roll over. So a lot to pay attention to. So Opsar here says, Hyundai and VW make EVs in the United States. It's not so much about them being made here. It's about how many of the parts are foreign. That's going to be the critical thing. So I would suspect that every single car that is made in America uses a substantial amount of foreign parts. And the question is how much? And that's how we determine what the tax is. So it's going to be really interesting. But anyway, this gives you a full breakdown on what was just announced. I hope this is helpful for you. Remember, if you like my live streams, you want to be part of the morning live stream every day the market is open, make sure to join the membership over at meetkevin.com. Pretty inexpensive for the amazing value that you get, and the price will be going up. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.